Hi, everyone, and welcome to How Librarians Can Adapt and Thrive Through COVID-19. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Today's webinar is going to feature 3 panelists who have, just like all of us, had to adapt and change how they work and how their libraries work due to COVID-19. If you've had to rethink how you're going to provide services and resources in the face of possible budget cuts, if you've had to change how you're interacting with faculty and students and how they're interacting with you and your library, and if you've had to adjust how you're providing content to your library users, these are all things that we're going to discuss today during this webinar. We will hear from our 3 panelists about some of the struggles they've faced and may still be facing, as well as ways they've chosen to address these issues and the ways they've chosen to address these issues that have worked for them. At the end of the webinar today, you will have received some ideas and suggestions from our panelists about ways to make strategic changes by focusing on your core values, different approaches to engaging with your library users, and tips about making best use of already existing library resources. Before I introduce the panelists, I do want to acknowledge that we are all very aware that our situations and circumstances during this pandemic are unique. The 4 of us met last week in planning for today's session, and we had a conversation about the fact that our experiences are all very different, and they're changing on a regular, almost weekly basis. One of the panelists shared a metaphor that she had heard, and it really resonated with all of us. So I wanted to share it with you before we begin. So she had heard someone describe the pandemic and COVID-19 as a stormy sea that we are all on, but we are not all in the same boat. Some of us might be in what feels like a very rickety rowboat, and others of us may be on a boat that's maybe a little more comfortable and stable. We're all experiencing the same stormy sea, but we're not all experiencing it in the same way. So I just wanted to preface this conversation today with that fact that we do recognize and understand that everyone is in a unique situation. So with that, I would like to introduce our 3 panelists. So first, we have Maria Savova. She is the Director of Collections and Technical Services at the Claremont College's library. Maria is responsible for leading her library strategy in budgeting, selecting, managing, and making discoverable information resources. Next, we have Deborah Abston, who is the Social Sciences Liaison Librarian at Arizona State University Library. So she works with students and faculty from the Watts College of Public Service and Community Solutions and the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications. And then we're also joined by Janet Salmons, who is a free-range scholar, writer, coach, and artist through Vision to Lead. She's also the methods guru for Sage Publications research community MethodSpace. And then lastly, my name is Emily Smith, and I am very excited to be facilitating this conversation with these fantastic librarians today. I am a library relations manager at Sage. I am a librarian myself, and I now work as part of our library relations and faculty outreach team. So without further ado, I think we can go ahead and get started. We're going to hear from Maria first, and she's going to speak to making strategic changes in the library as she's had to adjust and adapt to COVID-19. So Maria, my first question for you is, what specific new challenges has COVID-19 brought for your library, and how did you go about addressing them?
Thank you, Emily. If you could be my first slide. So just really a few words about our library to put my comments in context. We are a single academic library serving a consortium of 7 contiguously located academic institutions. And the part that is particularly important for our situation right now, that 5 of them are residential liberal arts colleges. And that Both speaks to the fact that we are normally really high-touch environment with very personalized services and very high usage of the building and the physical collection, but also that significant revenue for the colleges derives from the residential part, from room and board. So in the situation where students had to go home, we are more heavily impacted than we normally are by recessions. Next slide. Next slide, thank you. The challenges that we're facing are both new and not. I know academic libraries have been evolving away from being book warehouses for quite a while now, but the perception and the stereotype that keep following us are persistent. And for a lot of our users and some of the people who actually fund us, that stereotype of us being a book warehouse and a study space is really very strong. So in this situation where we actually cannot be that present and transparently present for our students and faculty, this kind of stereotype is exacerbated and it's really hurting our ability to do our work. So we've always had to prove our value and importance in other situations, but now this is a little harder. And the circumstances that we are at now are that even if we had the people on staff, we are unable to deploy them really in the way that we need to serve our faculty and students and really provide all the services that we normally could because of the health dangers for our staff and because of our users actually not on campus. What happened is in March, when the pandemic hit, all of our students were sent home. The library building was completely closed for a while. Even our staff did not have access to the physical collections or the building. So for a while, we really faced the serious challenge of doing any type of work or having any sort of presence. And a lot of our traditional services, as well as a lot of our new innovative services, really has in their core a very personal contact, a very personalized service, use of the physical collection, having people in the building, organizing events, being on campus among our faculty and students, outreach, and so on. So that really became incredibly challenging once the students left campus and the building was closed. And in addition to all that, we had to deal with the budget shortfall, which, as I mentioned, comes from a loss of revenue for our only funding source. So the colleges are dealing with the impact of the pandemic, and of course, we are. The library is part of that community and only derives its revenue from there. And even our endowments got impacted because of the markets. So, so these are really some of the challenges that kind of frame the situation in which we had to work. Next slide, please. So faced with decisions like that, where do you go? We went back to our mission and strategic goals. At any given time, we've always had more on our plan and trying to do more than we possibly could. And just looking at our strategic areas and the reason why we exist and why we're there, helped us really prioritize which ones of our planned activity for the year we had to push back and which things, while still considering important, we could delay. So here you see our strategy map for 2019. We couldn't quite launch the one for 2020, but it wouldn't have been much different. So we're doing everything in mind that we're there to partner with our faculty and students and support research, teaching, and learning. And out of our 3 strategic areas, one is about providing exceptional user services, one is about stewarding resources and content provision. And then we had another area that we were really going to focus on this year, developing a model library organization. We had plans of working on librarian series, staff series for advancement and promotion. We were working on updating job descriptions and really providing a better environment for our staff to develop and thrive. And this is one area where we fully acknowledge is crucially important, and we are going to do all that, but for now it got put a little bit on the back burner in order for us to be able to focus all of our resources to be able to focus on the outward facing services. Next slide. So we had to really work to figure out of all this. So this is all great. We know what our strategic goals are, but what exactly are our core or essential services? And one of the difficulties that we faced was that the library definition of what is core and essential didn't completely overlap with the campus administration limitations of what is called essential. And then in California, we have the state definitions. LA County has very strict definitions of what is an essential service at every phase. During the pandemic, there were very concrete guidance of who can be on site, what kind of work can be performed. So with that in mind, we had to really focus on 2 areas: content provision, which includes digitization of resources, pickup and mailing services for physical items, including print books, DVDs, technology, etc., and all the collection activities related to content provision, like anything that had to do with ordering, licensing, renewals, metadata creation was still considered essential. And a lot of that could be done remotely, but we still needed to have people in the building to work with the physical collection to provide that. And then the other area is adapting all of our services related to research support to the virtual environment. And that we were very well prepared for that. Our librarians were already pretty good at video conferencing, and we already had the email, chat, and phone research support. Our librarians were very good at doing already remote information literacy instruction. So when they had to switch everything from personal services to online, they were very well prepared. And we ramped up the development of online learning objects. And we had to stop doing a lot of type of services and activities that we all were used to doing. And this is another kind of ironic thing, because this has been a constant struggle in academic libraries. We always wanted to do more. We wanted to evolve and develop. And we had, but it's always been very hard to drop something. You keep wanting to do everything that you're used to doing that maybe just part of your faculty appreciate, but you can't let them down and you can't stop providing these services. So we were kind of forced to really look through a list of daily activities and re-examine what is possible in this environment and what maybe we could learn to do but are not able to do. So without going through a extensive list, just one example of something that we in the library considered essential and were willing and able to do, but we were told to not do because it didn't fit as an essential service. We were about 3/4 through a full inventory of the physical collection in the building, which might sound boring to a lot of people, but I was, and a lot of us were very excited about to get the catalog finally to show what's really on the shelf. And I had to write an explanation to administration and say why this is very important. There are things on shelf that are not discoverable. There are things that we think we have and are not actually there. This is very closely related to content provision. And our campus administration looked and said, yes, we agree, this is very important. We want you to finish, but it's not urgent. So it will have to wait. And we certainly understand. And we all appreciated how much importance was put by administration to preserving the health and lives of our staff. But it's just one of the things that is constantly on our minds when we plan what kind of services we could provide. And then we get to the really the most difficult decisions that any administration has to make when we faced with budget cuts that are very objective. You can't advocate, you cannot convince your administration, the money's just not there. So you have to understand, and you have to, in a normal year, I would advocate for my budget and I'll try and convince them. Now I know that we just have to do this, and we have to find the least damaging areas where we have to apply those cuts. And from operation funding, there were some obvious areas. Professional development fund, all but gone. We kept some money for webinars, but nobody's going to be traveling anywhere. There were areas related to the building, events, food, stuff like that. That was easy, but that wasn't all that much. So we had to go to staff positions and materials funding. When you faced with these decisions, there's really no good choice. And since we're citing, I'm going to cite my favorite fictional character, Doctor Who. So the doctor says, sometimes all the choices you have to make are bad, but you still have to choose. So we did have to lose some open positions, and we had to lay off some staff, and we are still engaged in cancellations of subscriptions, and all that is going to be incredibly painful. But we went through a very thoughtful process of how to select. Next slide.
Yeah, so I think that, yeah, we have another question for you, if that's okay, Maria. So we were wondering if you have any advice about how other librarians can use their strategic plans and initiatives to adapt through COVID-19.
Yes, and with the disclaimer that some of my experience and advice might be completely inapplicable, especially when it comes to reductions, because people are in a very different environment. If you're in a tenure shop or unionized environment, you have completely different set of possibilities for reducing staff. But in general, what we found worked for us was really focus on high impact outward facing services when selecting what kind of things we need to continue to do, and be very transparent and explicit to our staff about the things we're putting on the parking lot, that it's not that we are never going to do this, it's not that we don't consider it important, but we just have to prioritize, and something's got to give. We worked very closely with our campus community. We have 7 colleges, so that's a lot of outreach, a lot of people to talk to. Also our services administration, and we really had to synchronize everything that we do, because in a situation as difficult as this, nobody can be doing their own thing and be successful. And when it came to the most difficult decisions of losing staff, we had to think about short term, really what we really need for the next few months, but what's going to happen when we get out on the other end, because this is going to end. So we really had to make the effort to retain our most flexible and high contributor staff, even if some of these people might have been in a position that right now is not highly sought, but these are irreplaceable positions, people with skills and experience that we cannot easily rehire. So we had to really think from that position of what we need to do and what kind of workforce and resources we need to survive these next few months, maybe a full academic year, but we did not want to be left completely unprepared on the other end. And it's the same thing when we were thinking about subscriptions. We're canceling some things that we could resubscribe to if and when our budget is restored. We canceled all the print periodicals. Nobody's reading them right now. It's very easy to resubscribe to a newspaper, even if we consider this to be super valuable and highly used resource. So just really applying the thought of, we know we're going to be here. So how to maintain, how to not damage our relationships, and how not to destroy our structure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. We are going to turn to Deborah next. Before we do that, I should have mentioned at the beginning that, you know, for attendees in this webinar, there is a chat feature. So if you have questions throughout this webinar, please feel free to put those questions in the chat. We are going to take time at the end for some questions. So apologies that I didn't mention that at the beginning, but please feel free to use that if you have any questions. So we are going to turn to Deborah now and talk more about engaging with faculty and students in new ways. So Deborah, to start, for my first question, what changes did you and your library make regarding user support? Oh, Deborah, I think you're on mute, actually. Yeah.
I was determined not to make that mistake of being.
It happens. That's okay.
Okay. So, good morning, everybody. Yes, we had to make changes in the ways we engaged with students and faculty. I do want to say that I am actually in my office for the first time in months. Our library just opened about 21 minutes ago. Our libraries are slowly reopening. 4 classes are starting a week from today. So I don't see anyone, but you know, it is intersession. So what did we have to do to new ways of engaging with students and faculty? Could you go to the first slide, which I believe is, yeah. So you can see what we will look like. We will be masked and we will still have access to our print materials. Could you go to the next slide? So in reopening our libraries, we did have some challenges. We have to have fewer people in the libraries. We're not going to be open as many hours. We had 24-hour service 5 days a week. That's not going to happen. We are really pushing and trying to prioritize using our digital resources while recognizing we still have a digital divide where some students have more digital resources than others. So when I walked into the library, I actually came here Tuesday just to see what it looked like. So furniture has been removed. Computers have been disabled. There are spots on the floor for people to stand on to wait for service. There is plexiglass at the service desk. There is sanitation, hand sanitizer stations everywhere. Even the elevators can only have 4 people in them at a time. So we're having many fewer students. Our study spaces have lower capacity. Only 2 people can be in a study room. In some cases, only 1 person can be in a study room, depending on which library building they're in. We have 7 library locations at Arizona State. I work in one of the smaller locations, but yeah, those are some of the obvious things. We were given little kits containing sanitizing equipment, a thermometer, and a mask. And face coverings are required. that will be something new, not seeing faces and not getting visual cues from people when you're talking to them. It's kind of difficult to communicate that way, but that's what we're going to have to do. Could you go to the next slide, please? So the vision we all have faced are these Zoom meetings. And there's more of that, more Zoom meetings. I've met with students in Google Hangouts. I've met with students in Slack. I've met with students in all kinds of situations, and on the telephone, on the good old-fashioned telephone. And that's our new reality. That's what we have to do, is remotely engage with students. Now, I fully expect that once classes start and people are populating the library, students may actually come to my office, and that will be something new to deal with. That hasn't happened yet, but I'm sure that it will. My office faces the computer workstation, so students will see me in my office and they always want to drop by and talk. And missing that will be somewhat difficult. Could you go to the next slide? So some of the solutions we have are some of the things that we were already doing. Tutorials for all kinds of databases and other services. We make a big use of LibGuides, so we have hundreds of library guides for subjects and services. I've had more online engagement with users, of course, over the summer, but that's going to definitely increase once classes start. Students are going to be showing up on campus this weekend, and then we'll see. And we always have our Ask a Librarian and Ask an Archivist services for very specific questions and research support. One of the other things that's going to be, I don't know, I guess it'll get to be routine, is the daily check-in we're doing at Arizona State. Every day that we are supposed to be working, we have to do a check-in and basically let the university know whether we're coming to the university, whether we're going to be working at home. But we have to check in every day, and that's starting Monday. And getting that to work smoothly is going to be challenging, and that's for students and all the staff at the university, faculty, librarians, staff, students, everyone will have to check in. So there are ways for us to do that. But we're reopening our libraries. We haven't been really engaging yet since this is intersession right now, but I am very confident that we will have more engagement shortly. Could you go to the next slide, please? So the main things we're using on our campus are Zoom, which most people are familiar with these days. We also have Slack, which is another communication device that you can create groups, and you can do individual consultations, and you can do group consultations. It's just one of the many ways we are having to interact with students and faculty. It's just one of those things. Now we are still lending books. We've had a pickup service since March. We've had a pickup service. We also have a service where we can mail things to students who are outside of our immediate metropolitan area. We've always had this service, but I'm sure that it was used over the last 5 months. And it's, using the services that we have, I like your way of phrasing it, Maria, outward facing services. The things that people see are going to be the most important. So at some point we will restart borrowing things from interlibrary loan physically rather than just digitally. And many of these services are just going to get slowly started, but we're looking forward to, well, I can say we, I can say I am looking forward to the challenges. Um, and really, it's just going to be a matter of being patient and being open to change, which we've always had to do, but being open to change is important. I'm trying not, I wrote these things down so I wouldn't forget anything. Let's see. Physical access to the libraries. So I'd say the libraries are opening. They are opening only for ASU affiliated folks. So the general public cannot come into our libraries. Access is with your university ID card. If you don't have a university ID card, you can't get into any of the buildings and you can't get into the library. We have removed a great deal, as I said, we moved a great deal of furniture. So our population density will be lower, but we expect that because class density is going to be lower in classrooms as well, students will be in their residence halls or at home doing online instruction as well as in-person instruction. ASU is doing something where there is in-person instruction. There is what they're calling ASU Sync, which is synchronous online instruction. And we've always had asynchronous online instruction. I'm saying instruction, I'm talking about classes. Library instruction we will be doing via Zoom. We won't be going into classrooms for that. I haven't had a request for that. I've only had requests for Zoom. The faculty is being very patient and accommodating. The students so far have been very patient and accommodating, and we expect that to continue. And yeah, trying to, I think, go to the next slide and see what's there. Yeah, so we're still doing reference and research assistant. I have mentoring in there because I have found myself at times mentoring students. Students come and talk to the librarian about their work, but sometimes they just want to talk to somebody about how their day is going, or are they homesick, or what kind of career should they engage in, or all kinds of things that students have talked to me about as a librarian. They want advice. They need coping skills. They need sounding boards. And while we do have services for students, there's student services everywhere, sometimes they just want to talk to somebody just normal, I guess. Librarians, we're normal people. So engaging with that's going to be a different engagement with those students, I think. We will see. A lot of this is we will see what it's going to be like. We really don't know. But we are prepared for opening. We are prepared for instruction. We are prepared for hopefully not swarms of people coming in. We are prepared for anything, and we have to be. We have to be, as I said, open to change. And I will say that Arizona State University is in a fairly good position. We're a very large institution, as many of you know. We have always been able to do online teaching very well, and online. So we've been coping fairly well with that, I think. The university is very determined to have as regular a teaching and learning experience for students as possible. And we're all trying our best to accommodate that.
So yeah, Deborah, it does sound like you guys have, put a lot of work into this and prepared for this new semester. How would you recommend other librarians engage with students and faculty in new ways to adapt and thrive through COVID-19? Do you have any suggestions?
I would say get familiar with the technology, get familiar with that tech so that it's easy, like I forgot to unmute today. Remember to unmute, but get familiar with the technologies, and students may use different things than you're using. So I know that students are using things like Google Hangouts and Microsoft Teams and other ways of communicating, and that may be their preference rather than what your preference is. So you need to be sort of familiar with those things so that you can interact with them in the space the way they need to interact. I would say that, and I will say this again before the end, patience is a virtue, and I'm not a very patient person, but I've learned to be patient because we're all, at a point where we're pulling our hair and trying to cope and be as flexible as we can be. It's about being flexible. You'll need to, talk to your colleagues at other institutions and see what they're doing, see how they're coping. One of the things I've done is talk to different people at different kinds of institutions. So I'm at a large public institution. I learned a lot from when we've been prepping for this webinar for a while. I've learned a lot from Maria. I mean, I don't know what it's like to work at a small institution. I've only ever worked at large institutions, and it's amazing how similar we are and how different we are. And so I would say talk to your colleagues at different institutions and see what they're going through. Look at what your public libraries are doing. They're coping in very different ways. And some public libraries have reopened, some haven't, but check to see what they're doing and to give yourself ideas. And talk to your own colleagues, see how they're coping. I mean, it's really I know that people like to say we're all in this together, and we are, but we all are going to have different experiences. So I would say get out and talk to people, do a lot of reading. I have been reading so much this summer about everything about COVID, everything about teaching, everything about, what is the faculty doing? How are they coping? And how can you help them cope? How can you get them the materials they need? We're all working on things like that. So I would say communication is key. Communication with everybody is key, but that's going to be your how cope, how we're going to be successful, and that is our goal, is to be successful and to have our students be successful and to have our faculty be successful. It's just a matter of coping with that change and being open and being patient.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I think that being open to change is really what's going to make us all successful. I do have one last question for you, and I know we want to get to Janet. So just very briefly, what impact do you think these changes will have on the library and your students and staff, the changes that you've made?
I think in the short term, it's going to be a little. What's the word I'm looking for? It's going to be a little. I don't want to say, well, maybe crazy is the right word. A little crazy for a while, but in the long term, we're going to learn new ways to deliver services, and maybe they're more efficient ways than what we were used to. Maybe we've been holding on to our past way of doing things, and maybe we need to. Maybe this has been, not that this has been a good thing at all, but maybe it's been a wake-up call for us to look at what we've been doing and how we can do it better and how we can do it differently and still be effective and still be the university library that our users need. And so I think in the long run, our learning to cope in this situation is going to be better for us. We've already learned that we can work remotely. We've already learned that we can still work in teams. The thing that we've all missed, and the colleagues I've talked to, is that we miss seeing each other in person. But what are we here for? You know, what are we here for? We're here for our users, our students, and our faculty. And if we can engage with them efficiently and effectively, that's the long-term goal.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Deborah. We are going to turn to Janet now, who's going to share more about making new use of your library's digital resources. So Janet, my first question for you is, how can librarians support faculty members who are having to move courses online?
Right, so next slide. So I have a long experience teaching in an online university. So I'm going to bring a kind of instructional perspective to complement the two librarians you've just heard from. And first of all, just to give, like a big shout out and virtual hug, to the librarians out there and to faculty who are learning new ways of working together. But, just from my own angle, as a reader, as a writer, and a researcher, I have just always loved libraries, big and small. Next slide. But, especially I've spent many years on the Cornell University campus, and after having the time in those beautiful libraries where just the feel and the presence of being in that kind of space was so important to me, it's just something that's been a part of my whole life. So making the transition to an all online library was hard. And, I think for, a lot of people, even though they may have been using online resources, to see the online space as, kind of your primary library is different. It seems, kind of cold. So next slide. But what I learned making that transition as an online instructor was that the online library is more than a collection of data bases and links to sources. It's but really the librarians are who bring that place to life and are able to convey it online. And I think hearing, especially from Deb talking about since her work is more directly related, to working with faculty and students, I think, you gave some great examples of that. But, I just feel that the librarians and what they do really humanizes the digital library. So I encourage faculty who may be listening to really, take advantage of, whatever kinds of workshops, blogs, resources, materials that are available through the library to kind of tap maybe some of the kinds of sources that you haven't used before, and where possible to engage the librarians with your students, particularly if you're moving into teaching online and your students are also having to make this kind of transition. So you can go to the next slide and
Yeah, so my next question for you, Janet, is do you have any resources that you would recommend that make for really effective online course design?
Well, in thinking about that big question, and of course, there are all the aspects of technology, whether it is synchronous or asynchronous, what combination of that may be, what the requirements are of your institution. But I wanted to talk, more about the, I mean, there are people on the other side of the screen. So, whatever technology you're using, whether you're in a learning management system or using kind of a collection of available technologies. And I, in thinking about all of this stuff, just going back to this community of inquiry model, which I've shared here, and this was developed back, in the early days of online learning. And I think it's really relevant now because, if we think about, well, what do we need to do, whether, from the faculty perspective or from a librarian perspective, as far as, developing resources and creating learning experiences. So, there's that social presence side. It doesn't mean that I'm going to become your friend, but it means that we create an environment where people feel comfortable to interact with one another. They can trust one another. They can feel like, I mean, I always started my term with, there are no dumb questions. If you have a question, someone else has that question and maybe is too shy to ask it. So it's that kind of like, I am here, there's somebody on the other side of the monitor, whether you can see me or not, because, depending on the technology you're using, it may be that you're not, visible, and you can't rely on that, to create that sense of presence, and, to use that to build the learning on the cognitive presence side by creating an environment where people have the ability to participate in discourse. And, everyone is talking about Zoom and video conferencing, and those certainly are good tools, and they can be used in a lot of different ways. But, to rely on it in a more just presentation mode, to just do like a, kind of brain dump on the students or participants, just, it's just not enough. So, how can we, yes, create that, hey, there's somebody here, there's that social presence, but it's about learning and, to create that opportunity for discourse. And then, the other piece of this, of the teaching presence, well, we still need to do our roles of making sure that, people are learning, providing feedback, providing assessments. And I would suggest that we need more of that online, that students can become isolated and lost. So we're going to deal with the isolation from the social presence, but, we've also got to make sure that they're moving forward, that, you have more time management responsibilities on the part of the learner in an online class typically. So, are they keeping up? Being, if you've got a big project that's due at the end of the term, like, don't wait till like, this isn't something you can do the week before. So, what kinds of checkpoints can you make so that you make sure that, the people haven't just kind of drifted away. So I love this. It's from Garrison and Anderson. If you want to look it up, there's, lots of literature about it. And, we're also posting about some of these things on Method Space, where I am a writer. So you can go to the next slide. And, I think, just, from what I can gather, especially for a lot of people who are newly, like they didn't volunteer to want to go teaching online. I mean, I volunteered. I thought, I wanted to work with students who are all over the place and people who are not able to go to school on a physical campus. But for a lot of people, like this is not their choice right now. They're being thrown into it and they see a lot of downsides. Well, there are also a lot of upsides, and I think Deb especially was, kind of pointing to this, how can we use this environment, to build in experiences that are going to help with developing skills that are going to be beneficial, whether they go back to teaching and learning online or blended or, face to face. But, I think trying to, look at the assignments that you're giving and see, how can I build in some, critical reading, critical thinking, especially now to, be able to identify fabricated and biased information, so I mean, I'm worked at the doctoral level when I was teaching, so we're looking at people preparing to be researchers, but I think even at really any academic level, being able to understand, is this a legitimate source? Is it something that's credible? And how can I bring in the visual side, the multimedia side, and all of the kind of richness and complexity that we have available in online resources that is very different from using a print textbook. You can go to the next one. So I seem to always come back to Bloom's taxonomy, which I think is the Swiss Army knife of educational thinking. And this is the updated 2000 model. But I think one of the important pieces, so as we're thinking about how are we going to build in those checkpoints and the meaningful discourse, how are we going to build in the critical use of information and really building the literacy skills while we're going, that the other thing I would say is really being very specific about the expectations. When you're in a face-to-face class, we can easily have a conversation about assignments and projects and answer questions, and everybody knows what they're supposed to do. Online, you have to rely more on what the assignment description will be, so make that description very specific. So we're talking about resources and what you're getting from the library. What are you supposed to do with that? Am I looking for basic definitions and concepts of something that's for a new area of study, or do you expect me to be able to evaluate those sources and judge whether they're credible or not? And to encourage, especially online, and it's kind of would be a whole nother webinar to talk about plagiarism and increased risks of that online. But if you expect people to work at the create level, where you've got to bring something new, it's not just like, I can go online and find 5 million essays about, Virginia Woolf, but what is it that I would have to, be asked to do, where I have to contribute some original insights and perspectives that, I can't copy from someone else, and kind of engages students more deeply. So A, be specific about what you want them to do with these resources, and B, push it up the scale a little bit so that they're having to do something that will make them, really think.
So, Janet, speaking of that, engagement piece, do you have any suggestions for what library resources really do make for the most engaging online learning experience?
So you can go to the next slide. I would look for a variety of resources, and I think some of those points on the Bloom's taxonomy about analyzing and evaluating, rather than simply, so a couple of things, rather than simply giving people a list of resources, read this stuff, by adding in some okay, here are 2 sources on leadership. You need to find 2 or 3 more sources and compare and contrast those, so that that's built in that information literacy piece, where they've got to go out and find something, or even like scavenger hunt on the web. Here are 3 ideas about leadership. Find examples of these practices that would bring it to life. Then looking at the use of, like like I was saying a moment ago, of different kinds of resources. So things like case studies and videos, where the issues and perspectives and problems are discussed, and you can engage students to try to do their own problem solving around those. And on the screen I have the social bookmarking capability in the SAGE Research Methods database. If your library subscribes to this, you know, there are a lot of tools within this that allow you to curate materials and, you know, kind of put together those kinds of collections that you can then easily make available. And, you know, we've just created some kind of lesson plans where, you know, draws on those resources. It would give you some examples and an instructional guide. So, you know, to me, you know, part of it is give people some interesting stuff to read. Go outside of, I mean, that's the beauty of the online library. We can, you know, we're not, if I'm teaching business, I don't have to stay in a business database. I can look in sociology or psychology or education and find something. And so, you know, I used to teach things about team leadership. Well, people collaborate in all kinds of disciplines and across disciplines. So, you know, give some thought-provoking stuff that will you know, give you the basis for some interesting discussions and kind of push things into that higher level of thinking. It just seems to me that, you know, there is the temptation for people who especially are unfamiliar with teaching online to kind of default to more passive types of teaching styles. I mean, I keep seeing, you know, comments from people on social media about, you know, I mean, you know, people are sick of just sitting in the Zoom thing. Well, you know, if someone is just lecturing on and on, you know, you're off doing something else. Let's face it, you know, they're not paying attention. So, you know, give them something that will make them have to think and to make use of the interactive capabilities of the web.
Excellent. I think, was that your last slide, Janet?
Yes.
That's your last slide. Okay. So we just have a few minutes. I think it looks like there are a couple questions, but I was going to see if any of you as panelists wanted to, if you had any questions for anyone else, or if you wanted to comment on anything that anyone had shared. So we have just a couple of minutes. Does anyone have anything that you'd like to ask one of your fellow panelists?
I just wanted to reiterate a point that Deb made about being patient, that everyone is under stress right now. It's not only work stress of having to suddenly work in a different way, but you don't know how somebody, I mean, if we've got when you look at the numbers of cases, undoubtedly someone's got someone in their family. I mean, my daughter had it. Give people a little space, and I would say, you know, on both sides, you know, be clear about what you can and can't do. So, you know, if a library used to offer, you know, personalized visits to your online class and they can't do that anymore, say, okay, well, what resources do you have that I can put, you know, is there a way that I could do this that would take less of your time? So, you know, we just need to be nicer to each other right now. It's just be kind. You don't know what other people are going through.
And I just wanted to reiterate what Deborah said. We did learn so much from each other while working on preparing this, and it's really helpful to put your own experiences in perspective and see how others' circumstances take them to a slightly different path and what variety of challenges we're all facing.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask one question, and I think if you can answer it quickly, we only have a couple of minutes, but it is for Maria. And so, Maria, the question was, what guiding principles did you use when you had to start making decisions about cutting staff?
Oh, God.
That's an easy question to answer quickly. So if not, we can move on. But if you have any quick thoughts.
Yes, it really is, again, going back and just looking at the org chart and almost trying to overlap the org chart with the strategic goals that you're focusing on. So really, it's all about positions. As much as possible, try and divorce yourself from personalities and this is really hard, especially in a small organization. We all know each other. We know our colleagues, families, children. We maybe done happy hour together. You just have to pull back from that, do it in a compassionate way, but really look at the organizational structure that you need to maintain to be able to come out on the other side, but also to really focus on the resources that you need in order to go through this.
Yeah, thank you. I think that is such a difficult thing to have to do. So so thank you for sharing that. We're at the end of our time together. So I'm sorry that we didn't have time to get to everyone's questions. We are going to be sharing the questions with the panelists, and so Janet, I think, is going to be addressing some of those over on Method Space. So I would encourage you to check that out. You can see the URL there, and she'll address some of those questions. So I just want to thank our panelists for all of their insightful thoughts and suggestions. It's always nice to hear from fellow librarians about things that they're doing that have worked, but I think we can all also agree that it's really beneficial to know that we do all face struggles and that we are all going through challenges, not only in our libraries, but like Janet said, you know, in our personal lives as well. So hopefully we can all walk away from this time together today with some ideas about you know, new ways to strategize and stay focused on our core values, new ways to interact with faculty and students, and you know, things using their resources that we already have at our disposal. So again, thank you all so much. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. We hope that you found this you know, beneficial. We know that time is really valuable, so we appreciate you spending the last hour with us. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.